Hello and welcome to this review of my Datadesk Switchboard. It's a fairly complicated board because it uses a modular construction and can be reconfigured into any arrangement you like, so it took a long time to test and script, but I'm happy to present it to you now. This one is new in box and it was a donation from a viewer, so thanks a bunch, mate. I always love stuff like this. It came with 2 cables, an adapter and a surprisingly thick manual for a keyboard. The switchboard was introduced in the early 90s and its configurability stirred up a lot of interest as people still cared a lot about what they typed on during that time. As a result, many keyboard review articles from around that time include it, so there's a fair bit of information available on it. Many reviewers praised the configurability, excellent build quality, and the smooth tactile feel of its Alps switches, which I'll come to later. One exceptionally valuable article from 1992 compares a large amount of keyboards, and while the $217 Model M was far more expensive than most of the others, more than twice as much as a Northgate OmniKey for example, the switchboard was the only one that cost even more than the M at $239, although according to one book I found it was apparently still cheaper than an Apple extended keyboard. God knows what they charged. They also offered exactly the same board except non-configurable, called the Turbo 101, which cost only $100, less than half of its upmarket brother, so the configurability came at a significant cost. Apparently they even did a battlecruiser model, the Turbo 119, at $130, which must be very rare indeed, because I can't even find a picture of one. Moreover, you could customize it even further by getting some optional extra modules. There was a $145 Logitech trackball module, for example, and a $49 vertical function key module for the people that prefer their function keys in the AT-XT arrangement. They even plan to do a $60 Dvorak option instead of having a normal QWERTY module, and a $100+ IBM 3270 emulation pad, whatever that might have done, but I'm not sure they ever ended up producing these. Even though reviewers unanimously agreed that the board was pricey, quote unquote, they agreed that it was hard to put a price on such power of customizability. Although by default it's one of the very few straight ANSI Alps boards out there, of course rearranging the modules is what brings it to life. You can, for example, make a left-handed keyboard out of it. Yes, lefty keyboards exist, it's basically the same, except the modules are mirrored in order, or, in my opinion the most intriguing, a 10 keyless with a 10 key on the left. See, a common argument for using a TKL, particularly common among gamers, is that leaving off the numpad gives you more space for your mouse. But here, because the 10 key is on the left, it gives you both a numpad and space for your mouse. So this configuration is what I ended up testing for the week. I'm a big fan of the numpad myself, as some of you know, and I play a lot of video games, so I thought this would be a cool configuration to try out. My conclusion is that this particular arrangement works, but definitely takes some getting used to. Among others, the rearrangement of the modules means that the F keys are in a very different position from where you'd expect them, for example, and my left hand is also not nearly as good at the right at entering numbers using the numpad, although even after just a few days it was still faster than using the number row. The numpad enter in particular is not as useful in this arrangement because it doesn't stick out anymore, so to speak, and you can't use it with your mouse thumb. But overall, I'm sure this layout is something that you can get used to with time. And while you have more room for your mouse and right hand, you end up with less room for your left. So if you normally leave it here to the side, like me, you need to shift it a bit more, which can be a little bit uncomfortable. I'd say the overall idea behind this board is very nice, but it would have been better if they used clamps to stick the modules together without using this communal baseboard. For one, you're limited to this footprint, you can't have it bigger or smaller, and you're constrained to this shape and to the placement of the F keys as well. It would have been especially nice if you could use short or long cables between the modules themselves, rather than having these ribbon cables that you plug into the baseboard. With intermodule cables, you could have, for example, the numpad completely loose plus a TKL, which also solves both problems, or you could go for a 60% plus a nav and numpad together, a bit like the Epson BFK, which in my experience also works great. To be able to make it work on both a PC and Mac, they included 2 ADB ports on the sides, as well as a PS2 port under this cover here, which also plays host to 2 dip switch banks with as many as 16 switches to toggle between Mac 2, Mac Plus, AT, PS2 and XT. You could also use these switches to switch control and caps lock, alternate keycaps included, and lock the period and comma key so that they never output the less than and greater than signs even if you press shift. I tried using it in PS2 over USB with the Saurus converter and even plugged it directly into my PS2 port, but I had difficulty with chattering and other registering problems, but thankfully the sender included a converter he wired up to use it in one of the Apple modes, and this doesn't have any issues, and you can get to use the ADB ports on the side of the keyboard as well. The build quality of the board is, as the other reviews mentioned, pretty outstanding, and at almost exactly 1.6 kilograms it has considerable heft. But one thing I noticed is that the thing that holds the modules together could have been done better. Here, for example, you can see that the alpha module doesn't snap in properly, and I've had this problem wherever I put it on the board. You can push out the modules using these plastic things at the bottom, but overall I don't really like this clip-in mechanism. I think it's the most shoddily built thing about the whole keyboard, which is a shame because it's otherwise very well made. As I mentioned, it comes with two cables, one AT one and an ADB one, as well as an AT to PS2 adapter. Both the cables are quite short, which is strange because several sources mention that it comes with a generous 96-inch, or about 2.4 meters in systems of measurements that were invented after the Bronze Age, cable. It's also got two-part flip-out feet, which is nice because it gives you the option of just a little bit of tilt without being too hugely unergonomic, and I myself use it with only the little feet extended. And now we come to the switches, which are clicky Alps SKCM white of the older pine variety with slits on the side, and they're a joy to use, especially considering their new old stock. I've reviewed them several times before, but they're always a joy to turn back to. They have a very nice, sharp, tactile bump that's almost impossible to get nowadays, and of course an excellent sound, which is one of Alps' strongest points, particularly in old chassis like these. They're not quite as refined as Blue Alps, but they're still pretty close, and they're a lot easier and cheaper to get because it wasn't long before Alps took out the blue switches in favor of this slightly cheaper design. The keycaps are tall, thin, double-shot ABS, which are my preferred type of keycaps for Alps because they bring out the sound of the switches the best, and double-shot printing is the best looking and the most durable. Of course, it is ABS, so it'll yellow upon exposure to sunlight, but thankfully, with new old stock boards like this, that hasn't happened yet. Based on the molding marks, they're the same make as the caps on Focus and Northgate keyboards, among others. Also interesting to note is that they're not white or beige like many boards of the era, but actually a very light shade of grey, which I'm guessing will make them look extra fugly when yellowed. Because nowadays the historically very high price is not really an issue anymore, I can say that it's definitely a board worth looking into. The customization aspect is quite interesting, but even if you don't want to use it, it's still a straight ANSI board, which is hard enough to get hold of with Alps as it is outside of maybe a Dell AT101. It's well built, with the exception of how the modules clip in, which is pretty shit, and it sounds nice too. Again, I think it would have been better if the modules had been connected in a different, more standalone way, but hey, it's a cool idea at least. That's it for this review. Thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed it, and following is a typing demonstration of me typing on this keyboard.